If you're ready to take your destiny into your own hands, you've come to the right place. This is The Bulletproof Entrepreneur, featuring interviews with the most exciting and amazing entrepreneurs. Here's your host, Chi Odogu.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into the show today. If you love what you hear on today's episode of the podcast, go to iTunes and leave a review and a comment. It helps other great listeners like yourself find the show. And of course, you can always find more episodes of the Bulletproof Entrepreneur Podcast at www.odogwu.com. And without further ado, on with the show.
Hey everyone, welcome to the show. I have a great guest on the line today. I'm talking to Mark Daoust. Mark is the co-founder of Quiet Light Brokerage. They're a specialized company that help entrepreneurs acquire and sell online businesses. Mark and his teammates at his company have helped hundreds of entrepreneurs maximize the value of their online businesses. Mark is a highly sought-after speaker. He speaks at a lot of conferences, especially relating to internet businesses. He's a contributor to entrepreneur.com, and he's also been featured in the Huffington Post, Forbes, and SearchEngineJournal.com. So I'm pleased to have him on the show today to talk a little bit about himself, his background, and his life experiences. Mark, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
All right, Mark. So I see here on your LinkedIn bio that this isn't your first rodeo in entrepreneurship, Quiet Light Brokerage. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Sure. So it's not my first business, and just outside of college. So when I was in college, I got a job with a company called Alabanza Corporation, and they were an internet-based company. And I got the job with them my senior year of college, and towards the end of the year, they offered me a position out in Baltimore, which I gladly took. Moved out to Baltimore, was starting a new career, did the whole thing of going to an office, and was working for a company with over 200 employees. And at that time, this was in the year 2000, at that time, the first internet bubble really burst. And a lot of companies that were receiving tons of private money and had lots of investors were getting crazy valuations without any real revenue models. Went belly up. They burst, and the bubble burst, and our company was really no exception. I remember very clearly a Monday morning where we went in, and my department, which had around 30 people in the sales department and account management department, went from 30 people down to, I believe it was 4 or maybe 5 people total. I was an account manager for that company, so I was working with our existing clients, and I went from having just a couple of clients, 2 or 3 clients, to over 200 clients within one day. Wow. I was one of the few people that survived that brutal axe of a day. Yeah. And the reason I survived it is because I was new and I was cheap. So it wasn't particularly skill. It was that I was one of the least expensive people there. Yeah. And so we struggled. I mean, that company struggled for a couple of years, and I worked with them for a couple of years. We got back up on our feet. And then a few years later, I got let go by the company for what amounted to office politics. And that was my last real hurrah with the corporate world. I was really disenchanted by it, and thought, well, if I can get fired for, while still doing my job, but get fired for politics, what good is that? I'd rather work for myself. Yeah. And I've been fortunate to do so. I've called it being professionally unemployed, because that's how I started. I started unemployed, and I started just doing whatever I could to make some money on the side. And the first business I started was a publication online for entrepreneurs. I help people. I wrote articles on things like marketing, coding, setting up a website, and business issues as well. And I grew that up to over 220,000 subscribers. And I sold that a few years after I started it. And that's what turned me on to the idea of brokerage, which I started about a year after I sold that first business. And that's how I got to where I am today.
Wow, that's fascinating stuff. I see here you were a brief political consultant once upon a time.
Yeah, politics is one of those things that I get interested in, and I used to love a lot more than I do now, and then I get turned off by it. My brother-in-law was a representative in the state of Wisconsin. I worked on his campaign for a summer. I've worked on a few other campaigns as well. And again, I got this really big love-hate relationship with politics. I love the strategy and some of the logistics and some of the stuff behind it. But given how consequential it is and how toxic space is, there are times when I just want to leave. I was really involved for a while in local politics. I think it was now 4 years ago. I was at a regional meeting, and I ended up walking out because I got so disgusted, and I haven't gone back since. So that's where I am today. Someday again, maybe I'll get back involved in it, but it's not going to happen anytime too soon.
Yeah, I understand perfectly. I'm the same way myself. I try to stay away out of political conversations just because the way I look at it, they all seem to talk a lot of good stuff, but they all seem to do the same crap over and over again. So I'm like, what's the point? As long as they try and leave business owners alone, I'm fine with whatever they want to do in government. But yeah, I get your point completely. So
yeah, and I found that if you want to make a change in politics, you really have to give a lot of time and energy and effort. And that's honestly why I walked out. I started to see, showing up to monthly meetings wasn't going to do any good. Mm-hmm. I really needed to dedicate time, and I just don't have it. So maybe later on in life I'll get involved when I can actually affect a change. But right now I'll vote, and I'll leave it to about that.
Yeah, no, that's good stuff. So you got into brokerage after you sold your first business, and then what switched on the light for you that you could probably do this full time? Because you've been doing this business for at least over 10 years now, looking at...
yeah. So October of this year is our 10-year anniversary.
Oh, wow.
And
congrats.
Yeah, I'm actually in the process of writing a blog post. I don't know if it'll be published by the time this episode is published, but a blog post on my 10 favorite deals over the past 10 years. And it's an interesting question. When did I first decide, or when did I first realize that I could do this full time? I really went back and forth for probably the first 4 or 5 years, if I even wanted to do this full time. Brokering is stressful. I mean, it's tough.
Yeah.
There's really good money in it, but it's a feast or famine sort of position and career, and frankly, I've got kids. It's stressful, And as I was going down and writing this blog post, I was thinking about some of my favorite deals, and I think I don't have a list in front of me. I think 3 of the deals that make my top 10 list for my favorite deals all happened when I was about to go broke.
Wow.
So, it's one of those things where I question a lot about whether or not I wanted to go full time with it. It didn't help that we had a really bad recession just a couple years after I started the company. I'd say it was probably about 6 years ago that I dedicated myself to this business and wanting to grow it. And that was about 6 years ago. I sold off all the other assets that I owned. I focused entirely on this, and it's turned out well. I'm very happy with where we are right now, and we're continuing to grow with that. And I see just how much bigger we can get, and that's pretty exciting. Fortunately, I haven't had to worry about going broke recently, but with this industry, you just never know. Like I said, it's feast or famine.
Yeah. So, I mean, you just mentioned a lot of things there. So, I want to dissect each and every one of them one-on-one. And you were talking about, when you started the company was, 2007? That was around the Great Recession. Things were just about to happen, and things really crashed in 2008, correct?
It was more around 2009. At the end of 2008, we could see the writing on the wall. And I remember talking to one of my brokers at the time, and he told me, he said, hey, something's about to happen. And it was right at the end of 2008 where things started to happen. We didn't feel the effects in full swing until 2009 and 2010.
Okay. So now your first few deals, how did you put them together? Because at this point, you had only done your own private business. You had only sold your own private business. So how did you learn about putting together deals and acquiring and selling online businesses? Because it seems to me that that's in the purview of, investment bankers or specialists in M&A that will be doing such transactions. So how did you acquire the skill sets to perform in the business?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I'd be lying if I said that there wasn't some level of us learning as we went. Because there was, and I did learn a lot in those first few years on how to do a good deal. But with the first deals, I knew the general structure. I knew it from going through it myself firsthand. I knew what process I wanted to follow to be able to protect my clients, the sellers, and also the buyers. And I also relied on some help from attorneys that were M&A attorneys. So I was able to get some insight there. But I'd say it probably took about 3 years before we knew enough where I could honestly, looking back, and 2020 is obviously gives us a better perspective here. It really took a few years before we really figured it out in detail how to make it work.
Hello?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes, okay. I thought we got cut off. Yeah, I can hear it. Okay, so it took about 3 years for it to really get going, and then the recession hits. You guys, deal flow, I'm sure, dries up. So how did you survive that period of famine, so to speak?
Not very well. 2008, I hired 5 brokers, and then the recession hit, and most of those brokers ended up moving on to other things. Honestly, I mean, it was kind of month to month that we were doing things. The good thing for us is that there wasn't a lot of other companies operating in the space at the time. So what was out there, we were able to pick up most of the business that was out there, or a good portion of it to survive. But yeah, it was lean. I mean, fewer people were buying online businesses because investors were getting away from risky investments like an online business. And the businesses that were for sale, most of them were in decline. And that's not as an appealing business to buy if it's declining year over year. So it was a bit more of a tough time. And it was the beginning of 2011. And again, I told you in this blog post, I'm recording some of my favorite deals. And beginning of 2011 was really, really tough. We'd gone through 2010. It was not a great year for revenue for the company. And at the end of the year, my sister had a massive heart attack. And so I ended up spending a good month and a half, not really working, not paying attention to the business. I got into 2011 and realized at that point, I don't have any money.
Yeah.
I was broke. I was like, oh, what am I going to do? But as I look back in the past, deals tended to crop up at the right time, and that's exactly what happened. A deal cropped up from a client that I had worked with on many deals. He was a buyer. He bought probably half a dozen or more businesses from us, and he wanted to sell one of them. And we were able to sell it, and it was one of the few businesses that people were seeing that was actually growing. Wow. And that ended up being a bit of a bellwether to say that the Great Recession was on its way out, and growing businesses were coming back. And so we were able to survive through the recession.
That's some good stuff. So you've mentioned repeatedly about your 10 favorite deals. So let's talk a little bit about them. What makes up a good deal for you? So give me like maybe your third favorite deal, and why was that so good?
Well, so the way I'm writing my 10 favorite deals, a lot of it is how from these deals, when I look back at them over the last 10 years, I can see the DNA of our company in these deals, right? And so I don't want to give too much away, but the third favorite deal, the reason that's a favorite deal is I believe that one was the one where that was a deal called Purestat, and the person who sold that company is now a equity holder in my company and one of my most successful brokers that I've ever hired. And so it's one of my favorite deals because it introduced me to him, and obviously that's been a really good thing for our company. To your question, though, what makes a good deal? Some of the other ones on our list that make the list. It really, what makes a good deal would be the buyer and the seller being good people. And I don't want to make it sound too childish here, but when you're dealing with valuable assets, 6, 7, 8-figure online businesses for sale, these are risky investments for a buyer to make. It's a risky process for a seller to decide to sell that business. So dealing with people that you can trust, boy, that makes such a big difference. And dealing with people that have just a simple level of professionalism and courtesy makes such a huge difference. And I tell people this all the time. For buyers, politeness and kindness and professionalism will win you more deals and get you better deals. You will not have to pay as much. Wow. For sellers, being polite, being courteous, and being organized gains you value. Like, it will gain you a lot of value at the end of the day. And so a good deal is one where you have the right mindset going into it from the buyer and the seller. And they have that. Obviously, there's a lot that goes into a good deal. You have to have a good business. You have to have the fundamentals right. And we preach this a lot, right? What are the fundamentals of a good business for sale? So you have to get those right. But when I look back at the things that are memorable, it's the deals where I've dealt with buyers and sellers who are professional and knew what they were doing. And the result is something that works for everybody, and everybody ends up coming out ahead and making money.
Oh. Now, it's funny to me you mentioned that, because I'm thinking, to my mind, a good deal would be one where, the buyer is able to get it on the cheap and then is able to do some financial or operational engineering and maximizes value somehow, and then the whole thing blows up in the valuation and it becomes a unicorn and everybody IPOs and makes a lot of money. Whereas you're just saying here, what makes a good deal is just being a good, decent human being, like the soft skills and the high touch things that people don't really consider when they're looking into the typical M&A transaction, So that's very interesting.
I think when people think about M&A transactions, they often think about that the hardball negotiation tactics and really, sticking it to the other person. But I'll tell you what, that stuff comes around and bites you at the end of the day. Yeah. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't get a business that is really on the cheap, right? Those opportunities exist, and if you can get them, get them. Mm-hmm. But if you have to use dishonest tactics, if you have to use hardball tactics, if you have to really, wrangle somebody for that, that's a bad deal. Or in my mind, I'll tell you, I'll give away one of the ones on my list. It's a deal that I worked on that I actually didn't sell. And it was for a website that was really appealing to a professional sports team here in the United States. I was hired to approach the sports team and to negotiate the sale of this website, which I did. We started down this road, and my client called me and wanted me to lie to them. He wanted me to tell them a story about another buyer who had approached to buy the business so we could gain leverage and get more out of them. And I refused, and he and I got in an argument, and we both mutually fired each other. I was in my car driving. I remember very, very clearly. He said, I'm not sure if you're the person for this job. And I said, I can guarantee I'm not the person for this job if this is what you're asking me to do. Yeah. Now, I'll be honest, if you have to lie to negotiate, you're a crappy negotiator. Yeah. Good negotiation and good sale means that you figure out the scenario that is a win for everybody involved. And here's the other part to it. People who are selling their businesses, who are selling their online businesses, in the vast majority of cases, aren't doing it for the financial benefit. Yeah. Because it makes more money to hang on to your business for the long term. Mm-hmm. There's usually other things involved. And so you have to, as a buyer, you have to take that into consideration. What are all the goals of this person? Why are they selling their business in reality, right? Is it burnout? Is it new opportunities? Is it because they don't have any other choice? And respecting that. And from the sell side as well, understanding that the person buying your business is buying because they want a return on investment. Yep. And so you need to be able to offer that and show them how they can get a return on that investment. That's a good deal. And that's a deal that where things can happen. As I've been going through this list of my favorite deals, one thing that comes clear is the good deals branch off into other good deals. The people that I've worked with on repeat business is remarkable when you consider the size of assets that we're selling. Yeah. But they're the ones that are consistently successful because they build relationships, and those relationships pay off. This is way more about relationships than it is about anything else.
Yeah, and I'm so happy you mentioned this so much more about relationships compared to anything else, because I think the world is almost getting away from knowing that business is more relational as opposed to transactional. That these not to sound preachy or anything, but this is kind of like the Bible of when you put your bread in many waters, after a while it'll come back to you. There's a parable like that in the Bible, but it's just basically putting out good energy, good karma out there, making this work for both parties, because you never know where the trajectory of that person's life could lead you. Like you said, you did a deal where it ended up being that the guy becomes a partner in your business, and now he's worked with you for many years. And all other serendipitous things could come out of such similar deals. So it's really interesting and really, really comforting to know that these are the kind of things that one should actually look out for when they're trying to acquire a business.
Yeah, what I would say is invest in the people first. I mean, again, that's not to say that there are not legitimate and completely honest and things that you should do if you want to sell your business to gain value. I mean, we've done some things for people where they've added, hundreds of thousands of dollars in value to their business with just a few simple changes to their business. Yeah. These are completely good things to do, and you should do them. But invest in the relationships with people, because that holds more value in the long term for everybody involved. And again, 10 years, hundreds and hundreds of deals. I've dealt with thousands of people. I'll tell you what, the people that are most successful understand that. They understand that you invest in people first, and the other stuff comes naturally from that.
Yeah. So what are some other things someone can do to maximize the value of the business when they want to sell it?
Yeah, good question. So the first thing that I always talk about, and people don't like me talking about this because it sounds a little bit boring, but you have to know your numbers. You have to have good records. You have to keep clean books. You have to have your business in order. We deal with a lot of clients who come to us. They want to sell their business. Their books are a mess. They don't know how much money they're really making, or they don't have things organized with their business. And from a perspective of somebody who wants to buy that, keep in mind that a buyer is motivated primarily by gaining a return on investment. Yeah. And so they're constantly doing this risk versus reward sort of analysis on your business. And let's say you have a business for sale and I want to buy it, and your business is a complete mess. Well, what are the chances that there's something in there that could possibly hurt me down the road if you don't know your own business? Yeah. Pretty high, right? High. If I really don't know what I don't know, I'm not going to invest 6, 7, 8 figures in you or your business. Contrast that with somebody who has really clean financial records, has the operating procedures for their business written out, has all their documents in order. That sort of thing really does add value and is a really good first step. The second thing that you can do with that is, when you have that information in order, is you can take that information and you can identify areas to add value. For example, I tell people to focus on 4 things primarily when you want to maximize the value of your business. The first would be areas of risk. What could hurt your business? What could really damage the revenue overnight on your business? And there's lots of things that you can look at there. Is the product that you're selling or the business that you're in, is it a fad industry? For example, are you capitalizing on maybe the latest diet fad going on? That would be something that's sort of risky. Or do you rely on only one vendor? Or are you the only person in your business? These are all areas of risk that you have to look out for and learn to mitigate those. 2, growth. You need to be able to identify the growth opportunities of your business and realize that they need to be realistic, right? You can't just say add more marketing. Anybody can say that. Yeah. Identify something that's realistic. The analogy I like to use would be oil, right? You could say, you know what? We think there might be oil here. You just have to dig and maybe you'll find some. Or you can say, we've already done the surveys. We know there's oil there. Somebody just needs to bring in the equipment. That's a big difference in that. The third thing would be transferability. Make sure that somebody can take over your business and run it from day one. If there's any obstacle to that, then that's going to cause a problem in the sale and possibly make it unsellable. And the fourth thing I tell people to focus on, which I've already talked about, would be that documentation. Those 4 things, if you lower your risk, increase growth opportunities, make sure transferability is easy and doable, and have clean documentation, that's the first way that you can maximize the value of any business.
Okay, now we've talked about buying a business. So on the other side of that is the seller selling the business. Have you ever encountered a situation where a seller has seller's remorse after selling their business, and how have you been able to mitigate that? Sure.
The very first one I sold was a good friend of mine. And, it was a lesson that he learned and I learned. Over the years, I've become a lot more careful when I talk to somebody who wants to sell their business, and have really tried to test them to make sure they want to sell. Yeah. People are surprised when I tell them. I go to conferences and people ask, I'm trying to figure out when the best time is to sell my business, and my first reaction is never. it's, selling a business is not an option you necessarily want to take unless somebody is offering you a crazy, ridiculous amount of money for it. The Google shows up at your door and says that they're going to buy you out for $1 billion. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. For the most people, for the vast majority of entrepreneurs out there, it doesn't make sense to sell until there's some other compelling reason to do so. If you're experiencing burnout in your business, there's other options than selling. If you have another opportunity that you want to pursue, there's again other options that you can look at. So I think, what have I done on my side? I really do try and make sure that people are ready to sell before they do that, and make sure that they put in the time if they have the time available. To maximize the value of the business if they're determined that that's what they want to do. Something that we do at Quiet Light Brokerage, all of our advisors are entrepreneurs. We've all built, we've all bought, we've all sold our own online businesses of some sort. And the reason that I like working with people who are entrepreneurs who have that background is we get it. They get it. They understand how hard it is to build a business that's profitable. And the first business I sold, I thought I'd be able to do it pretty easily the second time around. It's tough. It's hard to do. So, anyone listening to this that's thinking about selling the business, I would say, consider it carefully. Consider other options first. It's not a bad thing to sell a business, but by any means, and there's some benefits to it. But make sure that you explore all of your options first and foremost.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest problems, especially in businesses, whether buying or selling, is the person selling the business falls in love with either the business idea or the kind of industry they're in. So even if they sell that business, tendency is they'll tend to gravitate towards doing something within that same idea or that industry or that niche. Now, do you think that's usually a good idea to stay in one sector after you've exited? Or do you... Okay, go on.
Oh, I was going to say, it depends. Now, if you're selling a business, most buyers are going to ask you to sign a non-compete agreement. So obviously you can't violate that non-compete. But if you know that you're going to be in a business, maybe in a close niche or a neighboring niche, then and the buyer's aware of it, you go back to what you know. That's what people do. What I recommend for anyone that's selling their business is to have a plan for after. And if you can test a new business idea, like for example, if you have a new opportunity and you want to take some cash off the table, you want to free up some time, so you decide that you're going to sell your business, make sure you know that new opportunity is going to be successful as much as you can possibly be sure of that. Otherwise, you can end up in a situation where it's not successful, and now you're wondering what's next. That first business I sold, that friend of mine, that's exactly what happened to him.
Yeah.
He thought he had another business idea. It ended up not taking off, and he ran into problems financially a few years later.
Yeah. That's cool. So let's transition out of the business and talk about you personally. So how do you manage a large family with 6 kids, a wife, and also a growing business?
I hang on for my dear life. I've talked to a few other people about this because obviously it's a bit of an unusual situation. But yes, I have 6 kids. My oldest right now is 11, and I have a 7-month-old as well. So from 11 years old to 7 months old, and I have 2 businesses. My life is very, very full of things, and it's fun, but it can get tiring as well. I think keeping balance is important. I do try and keep that balance throughout the day, where I go home for lunch. I make sure I go home every night. Make sure that my wife and I spend at least an hour together every day. And keeping those things in order, those priorities in order, is really important to me. But I'd say the second thing, how do you manage it? You got to have really good people that are supporting you. That starts with my wife. She really is amazing as far as taking care of the kids, taking care of the house, making sure things stay somewhat sane there. With Quiet Light Brokerage, the value for Quiet Light Brokerage is in our team. It's in our people. And that makes life a lot easier and makes it possible to be able to do that.
Yeah. And one of your new or recent adventures is you bought CatholicSingles.com, which I assume is a dating company, correct?
Yeah, that's right. It's the first Catholic dating site. Been around since 1997.
Wow, that's a long time. So,
It
so,
is.
so why did you decide to make that acquisition in addition to, working with Quiet Light Brokerage and also, being a family man and of course a community leader and speaker?
Yeah. So it's something that it checked a lot of boxes for me, which is why I did it. I love Quiet Light Brokerage. I love working with buyers and sellers, but sometimes you get that sense of Quiet Light Brokerage is so pure business. It's business. I'm helping business people help other business people, and every once in a while it's nice to be able to break out of that mold. And so Catholic Singles does that for me. I'm hopefully facilitating relationships, and relationships that turn into marriage, and helping people find love. I mean there's something really edifying about that.
Yeah.
Professionally, it checked a couple of boxes for me. I already told you, Quiet Light Brokerage can be feast or famine as far as the revenues, and dating sites are much more stable on a monthly basis in terms of their revenue.
Yeah.
So it made a lot of sense there. And third, I've been doing this for 10 years. I'm still an entrepreneur. I'm always looking for different opportunities. And 6 years ago, I closed myself off to new opportunities because I wanted to focus on Quiet Light. This has given me a chance to be able to focus on something else part-time to help kind of keep me interested and engaged rather than experiencing burnout, which I think any entrepreneur deals with eventually.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, that makes total sense because, hey, you're helping people, you're bringing, not like you're not helping people with Quiet Light, but this is more of like making a lasting impact in someone's life, because if they meet their spouse on the website, that is going to affect the trajectory of everything else in their life.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I don't talk a whole lot about my faith, but I am a faith-based person. I'm a Catholic myself. So being able to do something that brings that element of my life into my professional life, that's a great opportunity for me. I welcome the opportunity to spend part of my work days on that.
Cool. So as we start to wind down the interview, Mark, I just have a couple wrapping up questions for you. So what got you excited about being an entrepreneur? What gets you excited about being an entrepreneur?
The personal responsibility would probably be the number one thing. When I had that first corporate job, being let go for political reasons was one of the most frustrating things I've ever dealt with in life. Because I did a good job at that job. I had over 200 clients, and I heard from a lot of them after I was let go, and a lot of them were really upset that I got let go, and I hated the fact. I resented the fact that I worked for a company and that valued hours more than production, right? And that just doesn't mesh with me at all. I really believe in the ability in being paid based off the productivity that you have. So that's probably the biggest thing that really appeals to me. I'd say secondly, the freedom that it brings, which I'd say is a double-edged sword for anyone that might be thinking about becoming an entrepreneur. There's a certain amount of freedom it brings, and there's a certain amount of difficulty it brings as well. I mean, you can never really get away from your business, but I've had the opportunity to take my family to Europe for a month and spend time there. I'm able to take off random days and spend time with my family. Those sort of things are really nice, and I like that part of it.
And what is or was a significant obstacle you faced, and how did you overcome it?
There's been a lot. I think just those periods of time over the past 10 years where the money dried up, and those things really can be those can be really stressful times, especially when you have kids. I mean, I remember a couple of years after I started Quiet Light Brokerage, and we were not doing too well at the time, and I remember I was putting my daughter to bed. She was just a baby at the time, and kind of thinking, what am I doing? it's so much scarier, so much scarier being an entrepreneur when you have kids.
Yeah.
I mean, if I was single on my own, whatever, I'd sleep on couches. I don't care. Being a parent and being an entrepreneur is terrifying.
Yeah.
As far as how do you overcome it, I mean, same way that you overcome anything else, you wake up every day and you just get after it. That just because you're terrified or because things are difficult doesn't mean that time stops, even if you want it to. So you just get up and you keep at it. There's really no other choice.
Yeah, I love that. And I guess my final question is, looking back on your experience thus far, if you could go back in time to advise yourself, what would you tell yourself?
Good question. Probably to invest in Quiet Light earlier than I did, because it took me so long to decide what I wanted to do with it. If I wanted to be full-time with it, or if I wanted to do something else. And I was constantly going back and forth. Do I want to start another business, or do I want to keep up with this? So I think probably investing in that business more heavily early on.
Okay. Cool. Well, with that said, Mark, we've reached the end of the show. So where can people find out more about you, your business, and of course get in touch with you if they need to reach out to you?
Yeah, so you can find out about Quiet Light Brokerage by going to our website, which is quietlightbrokerage.com. That's LIGHT, brokerage.com. You can always email me at mark@quietlightbrokerage.com, or find our contact information through our website. And if you do want to reach out, please do. We love talking to business owners about their business. If you're thinking about selling or just want to know what your options are, we like to be able to lay those out so that you can make a good, educated decision. So feel free to reach out to us directly or to me directly, and I'm more than happy to have a conversation.
Yeah, and I know, Mark, that you write for Entrepreneur a lot, and maybe you're featured in some other business publication. I see you have some articles in Forbes and the Huffington Post. So tell us, are you active on social media, and where can someone find your blog post that is coming out, the 10 favorite deals?
So that'll be on the Quiet Light Brokerage blog, so quietlightbrokerage.com/blog. And as far as social media, my name for LinkedIn, so LinkedIn/in/Mark Daoust. And Twitter, you can find me at Mark Daoust.
Okay. Cool. And I'll link to everything you just said in the show notes. Well, it's the end of the show. I really want to thank you for coming to share your story, your words of wisdom, and your business advice.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into the show today. If you love what you hear on today's episode of the podcast, go to iTunes and leave a review and a comment. It helps other great listeners like yourself find the show. And of course, you can always find more episodes of the Bulletproof Entrepreneur Podcast at www.odogwu.com.